Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Ari Hirschberg, Manager of Digital Community and Engagement at the Exchange Lab. I'm talking with Honey Dacanay, Executive Director, Benefits Delivery, Modernization, Employment and Social Development Canada, to continue the conversation from the Digital BC livestream with Jillian Crothers on Legacy Modernization Part 2. Policy by Design. Honey, I enjoy reading your articles on Medium, listening to you speak at conferences, and appreciate your honest and at times tongue-in-cheek sentiments. I tend to read your articles over and over again. The most recent, Year-End Reflections on Digital Government, I believe is equally spot on for moving digital work forward at the speed of trust in BC. I will include this and other articles in the show notes after. We have some tough questions for you today that we weren't able to answer at the Digital BC live stream for you today. Looking forward to the conversation. Without further ado, welcome, Honey.
Thank you, Ari.
Thanks for being on the podcast.
Glad to be here.
Can you speak to the complexity of government and how to evolve tech approach or culture across ministries?
For sure. And so glad to be back. And so the short answer is that it's very complicated. And then the not so short answer is that each department is responsible for its own portfolio. And then within each department, the work is divided into single discipline teams, meaning IT is usually responsible for all things technology, policy for policy, operations for implementation. And usually a lot of the collaboration across those teams happens by paper. And so some kind of agreement, some kind of process document that links all of them. And when accountability over an outcome is divided up or dispersed this way, people tend to see their roles in this very limited view. And so it's just how they contribute to that very narrow process as opposed to the overall outcome. And so that contributes to the complexity. And then, of course, there's the inevitable inertia that also happens because there's a lack of urgency to fix things that aren't broken just on their end. So, for example, when the policy cycle ends, sort of when a decision is approved at cabinet, and then you sort of stop caring, or it stops being urgent for you, and so you don't have as much of a stake in fixing some of the approaches in the culture, and it's also hard to secure sustainable funding for projects that aren't new because of this, because you don't see everything from end to end. And so when something isn't measured in terms of outcomes, it's very hard to to evolve that approach. And so from the technology standpoint, usually because it's perceived as an add-on or another department is taking care of it, it's still perceived as this one-time capital investment that government makes, and the most complicated decisions that you need to make about technology tend to happen when the least is known about its role in advancing that outcome, and because it's not perceived as an ongoing investment, it's very hard to evolve that perception.
It is a really tricky problem. Anything you've done, or can you speak of any stories that you've done to help that process?
So we tend to look at different ways to get different public servants to appreciate pretty much policy delivery evaluation from the get-go, and how true transformation can only happen in this way. And one of the things that we're doing in my current role is creating something like the policy difference engine that helps you calculate, for example, the potential impact of a policy change and how many people will be affected by that change. And so an example, or a very concrete example, is what happens if you change the eligibility criteria for parental leave, and or even something like the amount that's paid out. depending on the time of year. And so using data from StatScan, we could plot out, for example, how many people would be affected and where in Canada, and who would win or lose out. And then from there, in the policy development cycle, they start to think about implementation and potential evaluation and the trade-offs that are associated with that. And now, without preaching a word of digital or data or about any of the technology options, they are thinking about all these things. Similarly, when something like that is codified in legislation, it's easier to translate that into the systems that are supporting its implementation, because a lot of those trade-offs have been considered. And so that's one way. There are still, I feel like there are still multiple ways that we can increase and evolve that approach. I think a joint responsibility around outcomes. So I think preaching the value of multidisciplinary teams, and so by showing that is the way forward. In Ontario, one of my favorite stories is around the environmental registry modernization. And so a team from the Ontario Digital Service, I didn't see them for the first couple of years, and it was because they literally moved and hung out with program and policy folks in a boardroom with the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change to actually understand the needs of the people working on that registry. So there was the Environmental Bill of Rights website is a registry of proposed regulation that's I guess for which there's consultation required, and so it's a consultation mechanism for any legislation in Ontario that's proposed. And so there's an Environmental Bill of Rights Act that mandates consultation from the feedback from the public, reception of feedback from the public and stakeholders over a period of time, and all of those proposed changes are posted on the site. Initially, the path that the ministry was going to go down was to just, for example, do another procurement. But there was also we asked them to take a leap of faith with the Ontario Digital Service and say, well, we will actually, let's do this together. And so instead of going through a feature list, for example, where they would look through different systems and look at a shopping catalog, essentially, of what potential features could be on a site. So a very technology-centric approach to modernizing their technology. It was what are the issues that matter? What are the things that what is the site actually used for? What is the type of feedback received? And working to appreciate the complexities of the feedback received. And so the type of feedback that the site receives isn't just like a thumbs up. That would be a feature that normally would sound like a shiny bell and whistle when you're talking about environmental regulations. It's a very specific group that likes to send 40-page summaries of feedback, and so usually legal dossiers. But getting the team to understand and getting the team from the Ontario Digital Service to appreciate that complexity and the nuance in terms of the work of the Ministry of the Environment really built a lot of social capital, but also the sense of, okay, you know what, we are going to succeed and do this together. And that's really the theory of change that matters. Like, it removes the fear of the unfamiliar, and where you feel like you're actually operating as one government. And I think that was, and it was a long game. And I think even in the beginning, the Ontario Digital Service, like there are other team members that were challenging sort of, what is this investment that will not see not see the light of day for another 2 years. But the real investment there was pretty much that radical change to approaching that problem, and less so about modernizing the site.
Yeah, that must have affected the culture in a big way, in a good way.
It did, and even that, like, I guess my favorite part of that story, rather than change by memo, which is usually what happens via deputy minister or ministerial sort of mandate letter, it was. There was a team that now maintains that, where they sat side by side with folks from the Ontario Digital Service, and they're now running this in a multidisciplinary way, and it's being embedded, and it's not reliant on the presence of the Ontario Digital Service, because now that they've seen firsthand what it's like to work this way, it changed their attitude towards investing in teams, investing in a new way of working, and also how they invest in technology.
That answer actually leads quite well into the next question. We generally speak of top-down change and how can we turn this around when teams are prepared, but leadership needs to view things with a different lens. Can you expand even a little bit more? Because that's a great start.
For Ontario, it helps to actually have a leader who gets it to help advocate, but it's not always where people start from. And so it's a deputy minister making the case to another deputy minister, of course, sort of helps speed things up. But in terms, but not everybody has that luxury, and so we still have a leadership deficit. But that's probably a story for a different podcast. In the meantime, in order to be able to start where we are, I advocate for making visible some things that aren't always visible, or to start surfacing the impact on the public in very plain terms. Sort of what is what are the opportunities to do better? And so, telling our stories from the point of pain, sort of what happens when we don't access the service, what happens when, what does the feedback actually look like? And so, how long does it take to complete a form that should take something that, and what is the current response time, like that can be improved. And so, and then that's the first one. And I know that there's a lot of literature, about the time tax now, and a lot of movement on it in the United States. And so I feel that this is something that's easy to grasp. But the other thing that we need to surface, and I don't think we do it enough within the public service, is the layers of what does the layers of approvals, or the bureaucratic layer look like? How hard is it to do the right thing? How hard is it to make the good path easy? And so, the data points there, like the process maps, when we ping pong through approvals and unclear artifacts, quantified in hours and impact, and then because that also leads to the cost of not changing. And I think the Canadian Digital Service tends to have a lot of tools that are public in these things. So the meeting cost calculator, the cost of the different processes. I think the different. I think there's another spreadsheet we're tracking internally, happy to share, in terms of what is the cost of doing this, in terms of an in-house team doing it versus a consulting team versus a team that we reskilled to help do this, and over time, and how do we make that more visible? And so, and then to also introduce perspectives, I guess the last one around that, for inspiration, because those sound like points of reflection, but it's not all bad. There are other orgs that have done this, and the new ones being we need to introduce to our leaders, very similar orgs that have been able to see things differently. Because it's very easy to hide behind, well, they don't understand our unique problems. They're usually not that unique. And usually you need another CFO who sees things differently to talk to a CFO who is resistant to transformation, and then also stakeholders, like to really challenge the myths around that people will present. And so one thing I keep hearing about, for example, is, the unions will resist this. Sometimes the unions are actually bringing forward and actually willing to be at the table for these ideas. And so, so to actually examine some of the very easy excuses that people tend to hide behind.
I like that you're making it so humane for people to look at. And I have to say I'm a big fan of the meeting cost calculator, because now I don't have to do it in my head.
I know it's very, I think it's oriented towards the federal government, but I think you can likely just add, because for the provinces, like there's a very, I guess the different classifications will likely be different, but you can add that and kind of make it yours and adapt it.
So what are your thoughts on using policy to keep up with the pace of citizens' demands and technology directions?
I think there's this great blog post by Matt Edgar around, I think it was something called Going Live, and anyway, when from it, the post says, if a service is truly live, it means that if people actually feel that their input is valued and they're seeing changes happen, they would be more actively inclined to provide it and actually proactively contribute to ways to improve a service. And so, I mean, for all governments, the typical thing is to be doing discovery on policy platforms, and usually a new government is the opportunity to sort of start and look and the perfect opportunity to do discovery and on particular policy platforms, so that you can think about the different trade-offs. You almost want to, and this is very hypothetical, you almost want two mandates, because you want that first mandate to do a lot of the discovery and thinking about the different trade-offs, and then get it to the point where, I guess the aspiration here is that a policy platform that is based on what they've heard from the previous mandate, and a government that kind of knows the different trade-offs. But in the current I guess situation, or in wherever we are, I think it is worth looking at the policy process, where I think change can also happen, where we start asking about impact on people. I am not sure if I've told the story but I love repeating it. So if I have, let me know. We have done so back in Ontario, one of the first things, suggestions that people had was to mandate including user research in the cabinet submission, like templates, and but I think. But even before we did that, we also ran our own sort of discovery, and sort of interviewed our cabinet office policy advisors as well as cabinet ministers about what they look for in a policy submission, and the policy advisors were great in that they would have been top of their class in a grad school program, in that they immediately answered legislative impact, financial impact, process impact, and all those necessary trade-offs and also how this will be communicated. But the ministers, of course, only had one answer, which was, what is the impact on people? And it's not that, not to say that policy advisors don't care about people at the end of the day. It's just that it's very process oriented. Like you tend to see your role as circumscribed in that. But to even just be able to articulate what the impact of this on people, like that one change, where you can say that plainly rather than copying and pasting, sort of based on this mandate letter, where we do X, and it's a very high level thing. I think we would be able to even change the decision that's made and and probably strive for something ambitious. And I think that's one powerful lever that we need to keep in mind. I guess a secondary thought that I had in mind about this question is also thinking about the aspirations of the open government movement, where start thinking about the amount of power and that we cede to people when we want to consult and ask about the outcomes that we need. And in some cases, government, we start to ask questions about the role of government. And it's not that every service needs to be built by and for government and by government. And in nor does every policy need to be a case where government is the only actor in society. And so I think that recognition that I think the way forward is likely a combination of actors. And so there is a bit of that humility, I think, around the policy process, where recognition of its role as the larger provider or the facilitator or the enabler.
Are you talking about like a collider approach?
Potentially. I'm not familiar with a collider approach.
Oh, it's where you're working with private sector to really garner both ideas, like not just government, but just really as a partnership?
Yeah, private sector, civic tech, not-for-profit, and in academia. Yeah, different parts of society, essentially.
I think I used the word correctly, but yeah, that's how I've heard it out here too.
But yeah, that's from the, I feel like that it would be mission-oriented, so very similar to the Massacato playbook around mission economy.
So how do you see Agile could be used in policy development, having a small, protected space to try new policy changes in the real world, then feedback into the main?
I think the feedback loop is likely shorter and more frequent, and I think that's probably the biggest change that will happen in policy. I think people think of it as a static one-time process, and it's all tied to a government policy cycle where it only happens in the first 2 years of government and or of a government mandate. And I think Agile forces a discipline where you're constantly and consistently asking, sort of, what are we learning? And I think it's really learning versus planning. And I think that is and not to say that that doesn't happen in the policy cycle. And you could also argue that, for example, there are some policies where it does happen. And so the largest experiment we have, for example, is our education system. And in some cases, full-day kindergarten. In Ontario, there was there was a basic income experiment that was canceled when a subsequent administration was tried for in 3 municipalities in Ontario, and with the idea to do this before rolling it out as a larger policy. But that particular I guess the trial got canceled. But I think some of that experimentation and very intentional experimentation that does happen. It's I think it's the recognition, though, that policy. I think the largest change again is that and the largest. Sorry, let me restart that sentence. I suppose the largest change is that policy development can't be the static linear process anymore, where you're always. It's. I guess it. If I'm to give it a shape, it's probably more a bunch of spirals where you kind of start from something higher based on what you learn, and so constant iteration, and so thinking about delivery and always evaluating what are we hearing, what are we learning, and I think the learning part is the most crucial part, because I don't think the policy process is doing enough learning to inform every subsequent sort of iteration. And I think the process is such so that, or is still such where we think about this in terms of years, when it also needs to be, but we need to be balancing what's happening now versus later. And I think it will change inevitably, because I think the speed at which some of our pressing issues are changing will likely force our hand quite a bit, and also force us to act in ways that are much more coordinated. And so I don't know if we will ever have completely protected space in that regard, but we definitely have opportunities to share learnings, to try something out, to test things in a smaller scale before we roll something out and in this one-size-fits-all solution.
To me, it's just exciting to be able to actually see what the work is and get to learn from it instead of just work on our own ideas.
For sure. And just the opportunity to collaborate too. And I think a lot of the problems that we're facing today pretty much span jurisdictions, and so and orders of government. And I think we don't recognize that enough.
Yeah, agreed. Can you talk about repurposing, not getting rid of our legacy systems, but modernizing when updating legacy apps?
For sure. And so I'm keenly aware that you are going to be interviewing Marian Bellotti next. And so my favorite part of the book that she wrote is essentially that modernization is the ultimate anti-pattern, and that that legacy applications are essentially the result of trade-offs as well, and so the real and most important approach to take when modernizing them is to look at those trade-offs, understand piece by piece, and also commit to them as investments, and that we maintain on an ongoing basis, that are part of infrastructure, that things that are just part of an actual service. And I think people notionally understand when we're looking at an in-person service that we don't just we can't just automate things, that we don't just automate we can't just automate processes. It's because and the analogy I use a lot is this very uncharitable portrayal of government that happens in the sloth at the DMV is the image that comes to mind from Zootopia, and so and just breaking that down, sort of why is the sloth slow, and it's because of all the rules, all the processes, all the forms, all the systems that the sloth has to hold in their heads while they're trying to understand what the transaction is that needs to be processed. And I think I remember hearing so the typical onboarding program, for example, for a Service Ontario, Service Canada rep in a call center or in person takes almost a year, and it's because we think about this from the anatomy of a form. So to process a single transaction, one form usually combines different teams in one ministry, and then the more complex the form, and then the more ministries and actors are involved, and sometimes there are workarounds that are to understand all the workarounds, because there are massive different systems, and depending on the transaction that you need to process. And so most of the time it's not a simple address change. Otherwise everything would have been automated already. But what if you need a driver's license, and in an area where you can't, and it's and you have a medical condition and you need a driver's license for work, and in which case you're dealing with multiple ministries, and then if you're doing that for your own business, then you're looking at different orders of government, and then the different systems that you need to sort of update, all of that, like the person behind the counter needs to hold in their heads and understand who they need to interact with, what the different exemptions are depending on what law, and what different permissions need to be in place. And so all of those things, if only the solution was just add technology, we would all have called it a day already. But it's a symptom as well, like of all the different like the complexities that we've created sometimes to with really good intentions, but it's just the accretion of all the policy intent and all the and the process sort of that was meant to protect the person who was asking for that transaction as well, but at some point sort of also inhibited us, and also didn't keep pace with technology and what's possible internally. And so it's also reflecting back and ending up being more convoluted and costly. And so with each of those, like you could only really tackle it one thing at a time, and with each one committing, with each part of a legacy application, sort of committing to repurposing it in a particular way so that you remember, and changing, radically shifting how you approach it one by one until you have something that doesn't ever, you tackle all that technology and strategy debt without kind of creating the need for modernization at as large a scale.
It's like a puzzle within a puzzle within a puzzle.
Exactly. So true. And also need to also call out the irony that my job is in the benefits delivery modernization, and I'm speaking of modernization as an anti-pattern, and so completely owning the awkwardness of that, and also to be honest, working through it, because that's what we do.
Yeah, it takes a really interesting, a good group to be able to play with these puzzles and really keep going. Because I agree, it's such a tricky thing for all of us to figure out where to go and how to play and how to do this piece by piece by piece.
It's also why we can't do it alone, and we need to think about the public service and about our own technology stack as generational investments, and the work of generations. Sort of how will this? Who will take care of this, and after you're no longer there, and also how would we think about a lot of our infrastructure?
Do you have any final thoughts?
I think that just that this work is never over, and it's still it's still hard work, but always work worth doing. And I think despite all the challenges around getting government to move a particular way, change is happening, even though it feels like it's barely perceptible right now. And so at some point we will all sort of gather enough momentum. So don't give up.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot too, because there's been some really great wins, like our Health Gateway with vaccination app, and digital identity that'll be on shortly with blockchain work with John Jordan's work. There's just so much good stuff, but it's still in it's such an infancy.
We're in that awkward part where the shape and future of government is still sort of being worked out by all of us.
I think it's an exciting place to be, even though we are at the awkward place.
Exactly.
Thank you very much for taking the time to share your thoughts, and thanks for the listeners for listening. Hope you enjoyed this episode on Legacy Modernization Part 2, Policy by Design. I would love to hear your feedback, comments, and suggestions. You can connect with me at ari.hirschberg@gov.bc.ca or click the link in the show notes. Thanks for listening.